Thank you, and good morning and welcome to the West Berkshire Health Scrutiny Committee. I'd just like to say before we kick off that it's just so nice to be in the chamber. I think this is certainly my first meeting, and I think for most of the members here. So it's so lovely. It's such a lovely environment. So yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Councillor Claire Rolls, Chairman of the committee. I'm supported today by Councillor Alan Macro as Vice Chairman. Other members of the committee in the meeting this morning are Councillors Tony Linden and Councillors Andy Moore. Council officers and external parties joining us to advise and support the meeting are from Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust. We have Andrew Statham, Director of Strategy. Tom Broadfoot also joins us as Communications and Engagement Officer. And we have Vicky Phoenix clerking the meeting, and the meeting is being live streamed via YouTube, and Gordon Oliver is the Zoom host. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Bridgman and other officers to the meeting. I don't think we've got any other members at the moment. Before we start, I'd like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching this, that this meeting will be held in a hybrid format, both over Zoom and with members present in the council chamber. During the meeting, I'd like to ask that anyone wishing to speak to raise their Zoom hand. All voting will be done by a show of actual hands. Does anyone have any questions before we start the meeting? Councillor Linden, is that a Zoom hand or no? I can, oh no, it's fine, okay. So starting with agenda item number 1, do we have any apologies for absence?
We haven't received any apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, members, do we have any declarations of interest relating to any of the agenda items? Don't see any hands up, so no declarations of interest. Moving on to agenda item number 3, I believe Alison Foster is on her way. Members, this special meeting of the Health Scrutiny Committee has been called in response to a motion made at full council on the 17th of March 2022 regarding the redevelopment of the Royal Berkshire Hospital. We've invited Alison Foster to provide an update before we consider the motion, but I am going to welcome in her absence while she's arriving Andrew to introduce this item for us. So I'll pass over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting us today to this committee. If I start, and then I'm sure Ali will join us as we get going. So the members of the committee will be aware that the Royal Berkshire Foundation Trust has been invited onto the government's hospital infrastructure programme, which is the programme that the government are using to rebuild 40 plus hospitals around the country. And so it's really exciting that we are one of those hospitals that's been invited onto the programme. The scope of our invite onto the programme is around the redevelopment of the Royal Berkshire Hospital, our main site in Reading, and not the other hospital sites that we operate from. But obviously, we'll need to consider how we make good use of all of our hospital sites for patient access and for resource perspectives across the next couple of years. There's quite a complicated process with major capital investment that the Treasury and the Department of Health and Social Care are keen to stick through on the new hospitals programme. But it largely revolves around 3 stages, which have Ali set out in the paper. So the first one is the completion of a strategic outline case, which the Trust did in December 2020. And we are now in the process of progressing the outline business case work, which is the next stage, and that would be the principal stage at which we narrow down onto a preferred option about the location of the new development and indeed the scope of that redevelopment option to the programme. It's then followed by a more formal business case, full business case, which finalises the costs, the contractor, and allows us to put spades in the ground. In section 2 of the paper, Ali's outlined here the work that we are doing to get to outline business case. The first of which has been to reflect on our clinical services strategy, which I'm coming on to talk to in the next agenda item, and what we've particularly learned over the last few years, and particularly the impact that COVID has had in us thinking about how we should run services going forwards. The other aspects of this are really into that decision making between various options that we have that we set out in our strategic outline case about both the scope and future location of the site. And that's a multifactorial analysis that we need to do that considers many of the features that have been set out around residents' access, staff access, the actual cost of the redevelopment that we would need to do, and also, as I said, the number of services that we'd need to locate on the site. That's work that we are looking to do and looking to engage members of the public and our key stakeholders on over this coming period. And we're really excited that that people in West Berkshire are asking questions about that and wanting to take part in that appraisal, because we think it's really important that we do it well and we get it right for the residents that will use our services going forwards. I think that's probably a quick overview of where we are and what's happening next. I'm happy to take questions from members in the room.
Thank you very much. Before we go to questions and I open up the floor, I just wanted to welcome Councillor Garth Simpson, who's just joined us in the room. I think we're just connecting you onto Zoom. Just to remind members that any member can attend any committee, and I welcome any member wishing to attend the Health Scrutiny Committee. It is up to the chairman if those members ask questions, and I'd like to extend that to Councillor Simpson to ask any questions. Councillor Simpson, if you'd like to contribute towards the debate. So let's take questions from the floor. So I think we've got Councillor Alan Macro as the first question, and then I'll take Councillor Linden. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You mentioned you've got to decide on which of the various options is preferred. I wonder what the timescale is on that. There's presumably some kind of deadline?
So as a trust, we would like to complete the work for the OBC in this financial year. The new hospital programme team are encouraging us to progress things, but haven't set us a deadline. But as a trust, we'd like to get to the answer within this financial year.
So within the 12 months, really, from now, 11 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman, before I ask my questions, I welcome the report on the new hospital programme, and also that you also had your refresh, which I presume will also be connected with that, in terms of there was some rather innovative ideas to helping patients as well. So I'm going to ask some questions here which have been suggested. So there is about 4 short sentences on that, if I may. Setting up of a joint health overview scrutiny committee. The first one is, when are you anticipating engaging with the local health scrutiny committees and calling for the JHOSC to be set up? 2, what are your patient flows? This data would inform the composition of the JHOSC. Question 3, how you engage and consult with residents in West Berkshire. And lastly, will you be holding open engagement events in West Berkshire?
Great, thank you. I might approach that from the bottom. Obviously, as we go through engagement, we'd want to do that properly, and that would involve holding events with members of the public in West Berkshire and in all of our communities. We've got a couple of those that we've started already on aspects of the building. I know residents have come to some of those online, and Ali and Tom will be publishing details of those in the near future. I think that probably covers your question about, how we will engage is definitely through those types of forums. We've got a website already set up as well to take individual questions and reflections that members of the public and our stakeholders may have on options. Patient flows. The majority of our patients come from the 3 Berkshire councils that make up Berkshire West. We do have flows from the East Berkshire communities. East Berkshire is less than 10% of our total patient flow as a hospital, and much of that comes to Bracknell as the cancer centre and through our work in Wexham Park. We do get some cross-border flows from both Oxfordshire, from the South Oxfordshire community, and also from the north of Hampshire as well. I don't quite know the extent to which those become material or otherwise in order to have to create a I can't remember what the threshold is that would require the joint would require, say, the Hampshire communities to be members of the joint committee or not. But I'm happy to come back to this committee just to clarify that.
So you think it could be held on the existing method in terms of our current committee structure for consultation, basically?
Your current, if it's covering the 3 Berkshire communities, there's potential that it could just be the 3 Berkshire communities, but Ali may have a better answer, who's just arrived behind.
Chairman, can I just state that Alison Foster is one of the parish councillors on Tilehurst Parish Council, but I don't believe there's a conflict of interest whatsoever. So I just thought I would announce that for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I believe Alison's joining us now, so we'll just get you set up, Alison. This is Alison, I take it. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Linden, does that answer all your questions at this stage? Okay. Can I take Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the thing. Just for my poor memory, back to December 2020, and I can't remember how much we were engaged at the time, I don't think I was personally. 3 options went out at the strategic outline case. Can you just briefly, presumably one of those was a do nothing option. What were the others, and what might we have been looking at?
I'll start on this. The strategic outline case looked at 6 options, of which do nothing was one. We had a second option that considered what we would need to make the current facility basically operational for the next 20 years. So it's like fix the backlog maintenance option. We had another option around about doing that, and then a minimal build. Those 3 options the board felt didn't satisfy the needs of the local population over the future, so were not our preferred options. We then had 2 options on the current site the first of which tried to make use of the buildings that were built in 2000 when Battle Hospital closed, and said, well, we recognise that those are of a different grade of infrastructure than some of the 60s and 70s buildings, and potentially can be used efficiently as part of a modern hospital. The second option said, no, those will need to be reconfigured as well. And the third option was to find a new site and relocate away from the current site.
Thank you. Councillor Macro, I noticed your your camera's not switched on. Do you have a problem with that?
I have a problem with that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I've tried several times, just
Technical
it won't
hitch.
start the camera. So I apologise for that.
No problem. Okay, thank you.
On the two options for the existing site, I noticed that both of them maintain South Block. Now, my wife was in South Block for about 5 months back in 2019, so I know it fairly well. I visited her every day, sometimes twice a day, and it seems a very poor building, and the walls only seem to be just a few inches thick. When she was in the surgical ward there, it was too cold in the winter and it was too hot in the summer. Some of the wards had air conditioning, some didn't, or it didn't work. So it seemed a bit unfortunate to actually continue using that block into the future when you're talking about kind of a fairly major redevelopment. The second question really is, you mentioned patient and staff access. I spent a small fortune visiting my wife, usually in Reading Borough Council's charges for street parking. Though unfortunately, there was a time when the barrier wasn't working on the multi-storey car park, so I was at least able to park there cheaply in the evening. Is there any proposals to do anything to help for both people arriving by private car and also by public transport?
So on your first question, Councillor, the only one of the options in the strategic outline case retained the use of South Block, and the second one definitely was presumed that it was not being used for clinical services.
I must have misread the plan, sorry.
I was just hoping that I hadn't misread the plans as well, but I'm fairly sure that was our intent, was that, you know, the more substantial redevelopment makes substantive progress on those buildings. On parking, we are currently working with our staff about their use of parking, and we've secured some additional parking for staff in the vicinity around the hospital, and we're hoping that will make some progress on the access to the multi-storey for patients. It's not easy. We know that we're currently doubly subscribed for the number of spaces that we have on site to the needs of both patients and staff on site. So whilst we hope we're going to make some noticeable improvements, both for staff and for people who are accessing the services, I don't think there's a silver bullet on the current site to parking.
Thank you. That was to use some religious organisation in the facility, I think, is the proposal to use their car park. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, so there's a site that used to be the Brethren Hall, and there's I think there's 100 spaces, Ali, up on Brethren Hall. But we've also secured parking at the Queen's Road site as well on a pay-as-you-use-it basis for staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. And indeed, on that last point, I'd simply say that, and I make my usual declaration in health meetings that I am a governor of this trust. So I have some knowledge of what's been going on and some knowledge of the redevelopment proposals and some knowledge of parking. To say that, yes, Queen's Road has come into play, And certainly the Trust, I think, hopes that some of the issues we've had with the multi-storey car park will be reduced as we move to a more normal issue. While I would say, for the benefit of officers of the Trust in the room, that I have had some from the volunteer area who drive patients over to the Berks for appointments, saying that what they could do with is a designated spot to drop off and drive out again, because there seem to be issues with drop off for volunteers who bring patients in. But we digress from the meat of the meeting, Chairman. I think I'd just like to develop three elements of the conversation about redevelopment of the site. The first is to make the fairly obvious observation that funding affects outcome, and therefore the amount of money available to do whatever is desired to be done is going to make a huge difference to what the Trust can or can't do. The difference in, and I'll let officers develop this, but the difference in cost between developing off-site and redeveloping the Craven Road site is astronomical. So just to invite officers of the Trust to say something about the money and how that is going to pan out. Secondly, is there a case, and I think this has certainly been raised by governors, for we already have different things in different places. I mean, there's been reference to cancer treatment taking place elsewhere, but I guess my immediate thought process is the extent to which having a hospital site in the middle of a town affects access to ED. I mean, for those not in the NHS vocabulary, it's emergency department, what we think of A&E, I think, but what I think the Trust will refer to as ED. So is there a case for having certain aspects of the emergency element of the Trust's piece somewhere where ambulances, for example, can get to very quickly and don't have any issues about drop off and parking outside and all that stuff that you tend to see in relation to some emergency departments? So I would say that the Royal Berks' emergency department has and is still doing pretty well in relation to the length of wait and so on and so forth. And finally, what the evidence is about location and affecting outcomes. So if you have a site in the middle of a town, to what extent, because you are clearly largely, or a large element of your population is in the town and you are serving the needs of the town, to what extent is that a point because people in the town can get to it, even if it is difficult for people out of the town to get there? So that tension between those who live in Reading and live and work in Reading and can get to, walk to, or get a local bus to the Craven Road site, and those like us who live out of the area, and there's been reference made to the site serving 3 distinct local authority areas, to what extent that tension can be relieved by better transport links wherever the hospital site ends up. So if you'll forgive me, those are my 3 points. I'd just like to hear what the Trust wants to say about those.
I'll just answer the first, and apologies again for my being late. And I'm not 100% sure what's been covered, but at the risk of repeating it, the money side of things, the process to securing funding is 3 steps in the business case. So the strategic case, the outline business case, and the full business case. And we've submitted the strategic case. We are in cohort 4 of the new hospital programme. So there are cohorts in front of us who have and are in construction using the first lot of money from the comprehensive spending review, the 3.7 billion that people will be aware of. The new hospital programme is going back to the Treasury for a solution to get the remaining hospitals in cohort 3, 4, 5, and the RAC hospitals, there are 7 of those, to get a solution for those to be built before 2030. and they're going back in October for that. So that's when we start to get an indication of what some of the likely funding will be. Not that it will be certain, because we still have to go through the business case. They will have used, and we are informed they've used the figures that have been published in strategic outline cases to put that proposal to the Treasury in October. So what we are also hearing, there's a huge amount of pressure. Obviously, when we started on the new hospital programme in 2019 in cohort 4, there wasn't a cohort 5, there wasn't RAC hospitals, pandemic, EU exit, escalating inflation. So kind of the messages we are getting is there's extreme pressure on the funding going forward. So I guess the short answer is we don't know what we're going to get. We have put in preferred options, and we hope to start to get an indication of that after they go to Treasury in October.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, your first question, Councillor Bridgman?
Yeah, I think we've covered off that one. I guess my comment would be, you know, we just don't know what is possible until we know how much money is available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of our takeaway asks for the committee is, you know, over the next quarter, we are seeking to influence the Treasury's earmark for us. And so we'd really welcome all of our partners helping us to influence that to get the best deal for the people of Berkshire. And I think, you know, we'll be coming and talking about how we think we ought to go about that over the next few weeks. But the council is absolutely right. The more money we get, the more we can do. In terms of your question about location, absolutely, the location of the hospital today arguably impacts on how many people turn up in ED and where those communities come from. We know that disproportionately emergency services are used by those who come from the most deprived neighbourhoods. And that's definitely a factor we need to take into account when we're considering the future hospital location and the extent to which those communities who rely on the presence of the hospital can continue to access them. Said against that, though, we need to recognise whether those patients shouldn't be being better supported by other aspects of the health and social care system, and whether they are seeking the hospital as a last resort. And as the council has mentioned, whether transport solutions would be available to support their continued access to the hospital.
Thank you. Did you want to comment on the sort of the point Councillor Bridgman made about the tensions, or, you know, in terms of like basically where you're supporting people in the actual immediate locality and outside?
We do have a health inequalities programme that we're running in the hospital, which looks at precisely this issue. So doing some research and talking to people about, if you place the hospital in this location, what does that do to the people who access and use that? And it's extremely important to us to make sure that wherever we go, we don't disadvantage any groups. So that's an ongoing work stream as part of this work that we do. We do that work on health inequalities.
Thank you. Just Councillor Bridgman, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I put my hand up just to make you aware, if I may come back, and clearly what I'm about to say isn't a product of the proposed redevelopment, relocation, whatever it might turn out to be, and no doubt those in the room from the trust will be aware of this, but there are issues, and other members will be aware of this, with transport into the site. And we've raised these with Graham Sims, who is the chairman of the trust, In particular, from my end of the patch, the lack of, there was a bus service from the Miro Park and Ride site into the Royal Berks. It didn't work particularly well because it didn't run long enough. It closed about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant if you came in, you got in okay, but you couldn't get back out again. Those are all issues that need to be addressed: rail access, bus access, and because those will hopefully help to minimise the car access issue. Because if people can get in by bus easily and know they haven't got to worry about parking, then maybe they won't come in and try and park, which is a big problem on that side. But these are issues with the site as it currently exists, hopefully not issues with a redeveloped or relocated site.
Thank you. Before I take further questions, can I just make a comment? You talked about how we can help influence for more funding. I think we very much welcome those conversations with you and to see how else we can help as a scrutiny committee. So perhaps we could have that offline dialogue, which we'd welcome. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to this formation of the joint overview and scrutiny committee, I'm picking up some of the advice that the officers have given us in respect to the next item on the agenda, and I'm just left feeling I'm not altogether sure whose responsibility it is to form this committee and what the mechanism for doing that. I mean, that may take us, into that next agenda item potentially, but I think we've got potential advice here from the trust. Is it their responsibility as they see it under the legislation to form that group and convene it and call it together, or have the councils got to get their acts together? Thank you.
Do you have any comments on that?
I think that the councils have to propose that. So a council would propose that as part of this structure, that it's expanded for this. That's what currently my information is that we would help feed and inform that. So we've had early discussion with Reading. We're now talking with yourselves. We'll have to talk to Wokingham, and there's already a joint committee. So somebody would have to bring a proposal to that committee to say expand the terms of reference to include this project, which I'm informed can take the best part of a year by the time it's drafted and put forward and tabled, etc. So yeah, that's what I'm told.
Thank you. I'm just conscious we've got Andy Sharp on the call. I wondered if you had any comments on that, Andy, or any other insights, if I may. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Chairman, we're not getting any.
Yeah,
we're not getting any noise.
Your microphone. So I think this is an important point. Thank you.
Right, is that better? Can colleagues hear me now?
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think as colleagues have described, it's really important to understand how we're going to set that up. And I think the joint working between Reading and Woking is going to be really important with us. So my suggestion would be that outside of this meeting, we have a discussion across the DASers with our colleagues in health to agree how we might take that forward. And we can then perhaps have a joint proposal that will mean that we can do something together, because that would be the most effective way of dealing with it. And if we deal with it at DAS level, that can mean that hopefully we can get through some of the issues and challenges that might stop us from having something joined up and shared. That's helpful.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Does that answer your question, Councillor Moore? Did you have another question?
I think it does. There was a reference to the fact that there's an existing joint scrutiny committee. Have I just been asleep when that's been mentioned before? I don't know. Is there a joint arrangement already between the three councils? I'm not.
Andy, can you comment on that?
At the moment, there isn't a joint arrangement. There were some discussions about a joint arrangement previously, which is where that may have come from. So, but we have separate health scrutinies.
That was my understanding, so I didn't miss anything either. Okay. I've got a number of hands. I'm not sure if Councillor Beck put his hand up first, so I'm going to take Councillor Beck because he's put up his physical hand. Councillor Beck.
Right, thank you, Chairman. I just feel we're sort of not getting very far. I feel that we have to make a very fundamental decision. Are we actually going to disregard the existing site within the middle of Reading and start with a brand new site, which clearly has so many advantages as opposed to redeveloping an existing site, which is a hell of a problem, to put it politely. Now, for example, I'm just sort of thinking aloud. There are two sites come to mind which could possibly be used. One is actually the showground in Newbury, which is its future is sort of unknown at the moment. That is clearly one site that could be used. Another one is possibly the airfield, White Waltham airfield. I feel we have to make a bold decision on this and get cracking. I feel to try and redevelop the existing site, to me, that is not a practical solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beck. Do we have any comments on that from our?
Sure, I'll pick that up. I think the trust absolutely recognises we need to make a decision, and that's the piece of work that we want to do. I recognise everything the council said about the challenges in redeveloping the current site, but I think there are also massive challenges in developing a new site, not least cleaning up the existing site, the transport infrastructure required for 6,000 staff and several thousand patients a day coming on site are forefront of our mind. And as I mentioned earlier, there are buildings on the current site that aren't that old and may be usable as part of a modern infrastructure. So we really want to do that appraisal well, considering all of the factors that I've listed and more. And that's what we want to embark on. And we want to absolutely take the views of residents and their representatives into account as we make that appraisal over the course of this year.
Thank you. And as has been mentioned before, presumably cost is obviously a huge factor as well. So it's largely may dictate the outcome. Thank you. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I suggest, I know I haven't discussed it with you, Chairman, but it might be, I don't know how amenable, but it might be useful for members to visit the RBH and possibly asking the other two authorities to turn up. There's also been a political change of control in Woking. I think there has been, obviously, I think unanimity as far as this council is concerned of looking in terms of health scrutiny, but I think certainly a visit would be useful. It's been quite some time when I was visiting. I worked at the RBH, so but we're talking here several decades ago on NHS supply. So, and I remember Battle Hospital well, but I do think that would be useful. On some of the points already raised, roughly the three unitaries are around about 450,000 population. And while I take the point that we've just heard, there are struggles, and obviously we've got to look at staffing as well there, but there is also main use for the blue light services or the ambulance service, as far as I can see and hear. And in terms of congestion, for instance, where I am, going to Castle Hill, for instance, there are quite a lot of problems. So obviously we've also got to look after the 300,000 population of the other two unitaries as well. And I was looking at page 54 of the agenda, which was we're building a physical environment supports healing, and it provides space to visit, rest and recover that would be useful for the public and visitors and also staff, so they can decompress, socialise and exercise outdoor green spaces in privacy. And I know cost is a major factor, but I think there are things that could be built outside. There may be stuff that you may also wish to have in Reading, but is actually the access which is going to be the problem. I know we've got Green Park eventually coming up as a railway site, and that may mean Junction 11. So those are my inputs I wish to make, Chairman. I don't know if they want to.
Sorry, on mute. Councillor Beck, would you mind going on mute? Thank you. Yes, sorry, just one comment I have. I think it was actually going through my mind that we should perhaps do a site visit, which I think would be helpful if other members of the committee agree. Did you have any other comments on anything else Councillor Linda said?
I think we'd love to have an event where we welcome colleagues from all authorities onto site. That would be great. I agree. Access is really important to all the communities, staff, visitors, patients, and it's complicated because people access the site in many different ways.
Thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you. Just on the access issue, the first time I tried to use the multi-storey car park there, I was trapped in it for about, it seemed half an hour, might have been slightly less, but just a lot of traffic going round and round and round, not being able to find a space. So since that time, apart from in the evening, I've tried to avoid using it. So that's one thing. And also on the issue of looking at the site and what could be moved elsewhere, one thought that came to my mind was the education centre, which is just opposite the multi-storey. That I would have thought doesn't have to be right on the hospital site, and has to be close by, I guess, but that would be one thing. And also those dreadful buildings in was it West Drive? But the main point I was going to make is on the issue of talking to the public, because I was aware of a consultation some time ago, which was extremely high level, didn't even really talk about redevelopment, and I responded to that. The next thing I knew, there was this thing on one of the local news was doing Vox Pops outside the hospital, talking about this redevelopment. And there's this large gap that I was not aware of this proposal going on. And I thought, if I'm not aware of it, I'm sure the majority of the public in West Berkshire weren't aware either. So please, as we go forward, can we make sure that that people are made aware of the proposals and given an opportunity to partake in the consultation, please?
Thank you. Really helpful comments. Just on a couple of those points you mentioned about the education centre, and over the last couple of years in particular, probably even longer now, we've been working a lot more on collaborative projects with the university, for example. And one of those is taking occupancy of some of their buildings and transferring some of our departments up there. So our Harborne building has got histopathology on the first floor, and we are looking at using the ground floor for non-clinical staff. So we are looking at, you know, what actually does need to be on site on site. And on West Drive, we have done some demolition on West Drive already, and we are aware that the audiology in there is a high priority for us to move from West Drive as well. So I think it would be really, really helpful for people to come and see what options are being scoped. I mean, there are lots of ideas, and we need more brains on it. And as you say, community engagement will help with that. So for example, the ambulance access, you know, what would that look like if it was coming from West Drive rather than the busy Craven Road? You know, those are the things that are possible with an on-site redevelopment. So there's quite a list of them, and it'd be great to be able to go through some of those with you if an on-site was thought to be the direction of travel. But we are alongside that looking at multiple options for off-site as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reflect on a couple of things. Firstly, I think we've established that in this case, form follows money. And how much is available to spend will very, very much determine what can be done. And the off-site question, I have to say that when the question of redevelopment in whatever form of the Royal Berks was brought to the governors quite a while ago now, my immediate thought was build a new one somewhere damn sight more convenient. But in response to what Councillor Beck's just said, I would say that I would probably speak for quite a number of my fellow governors on this, the obvious place to build is Junction 11, somewhere outside the AWE DEPZ. And there is possibly land there because you're on top of a motorway. So that access is there. You're not too far from train lines. And the idea was that there would be some sort of, you've got the new Green Park station going in on the railway, which means you would have some sort of bus shuttle to the site from there. Now, as I say, unless the money's there, that's a pipe dream. Unless the Treasury is going to come up with the cash to enable, and let's speak no bones about this. This is an exceedingly expensive proposal. And whether the Treasury will come up with the money, I think we have to be realistic and say unless the Treasury really digs deep, and there are and the Royal Berks is not the only, as has been explained, is not the only project on the books. It is going to be a redevelopment of the Craven Road site, and therefore you want to get your best redevelopment out of that process. So, you know, let's all, I think we've all got to be realistic. The other thing I would say about public engagement is we have already done, as a council, we have already gone down that road. I remember making sure and raising with our comms team, making sure that the fact that the Royal Berks was going out on this proposal and had got a mini website, you know, there is a mini website available to look at. We published that. We put out publicity about that, because it was important for partners of the trust, as I think we view ourselves, to send that message out into our population to say, look, this is going on, go on this particular mini site, have a look at what the proposals are and get engaged with the process. So I hope we're already down, and I certainly don't disagree that further engagement is good, and that we should all seek to engage our residents and the residents of the rest of Berkshire in this conversation. But I do say that we've already done some things along that line.
Thank you. It's an important point about the engagement, actually, and for any members of the public watching to make sure that they're hooked into those channels and the future events that we understand you're going to be reaching out, and obviously we can hopefully help you promote. Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you again, Chair. Just wanted to turn the focus onto timetable. I'm sure it was mentioned in the first briefing what the date of your outline business case is, or what you're working towards. And I think I've heard that you're prepared and encouraging us to engage with you, during the development of that. And then we've got some organisation to do across the authorities and such like. So can I just get an idea of what we're talking about in terms of timetable here? When are you proposing the outline business case to Treasury?
As part of the new hospital programme, we have to formally be told when we're going to go onto the new outline business case stage and be funded for that. Right. Until after this Treasury meeting in October. So they're hoping to schedule us over the summer, and it's likely to be towards the back end of this year, potentially next financial year. That said, the Trust is really keen that we do as much as we can. That's part of that business case, despite not being in the formal process, that we get on with some of those things over the coming months, as much as we can do within our financial envelope that we've got for the programme team. So there are activities that, although may not be within a formal process, we will be and are doing over the coming months in terms of looking at different options. But formally, we haven't been given a date from the new hospital programme yet. So that's all I can say at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, members?
Can I just?
Sorry, did you want to?
So you are just,
sorry.
I mean, it doesn't sound to me like we on West Berkshire Council have got much time. You know, we need to get the skates on to get the joint the joint scrutiny group going and begin to influence and engage on that. So
yeah, obviously subject to other parties involved.
Yeah, obviously, but an initiative from here would be good.
Alison, you're coming on.
Just so when the new hospital programme I think Andy mentioned that we're trying to influence our position on that. What they will be looking for is our readiness to go. So there'll be three things: the clinical risk and infrastructure risk and deliverability. Those are the kind of high level things we've been told. Deliverability means ready to go. So if we can have our ducks in a row and make sure that we are working, we've got a joint scrutiny committee up and running, we increase our chances of being looked at sooner. So I can't stress the importance of trying to get this going.
Thank you for that. I just have a quick question. Which other health scrutiny committees are you engaging with? You mentioned that on the papers that you've spoken to, or you're going in front of other committees. Would you be able to share that just for my own interest, actually?
We've been to Reading and Wokingham. Wokingham probably would have been January, February time. And Reading, it was quite some months ago now. We've been to Reading Health and Wellbeing Board and ACE committee as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm also conscious not everybody has health scrutiny committees, but thank you. Any other questions, members? Okay, there is no recommendation associated with this report, so members are simply asked to note the report and consider if they wish to see any future or further scrutiny work on matters raised in the report included in the committee's future work programme, and I suspect that will be the case at some point. I'd just like to thank you for presenting the report and for answering questions, which was incredibly helpful. Thank you. So moving on to agenda item number 4, this is the motion regarding that Councillor Macro submitted to a motion to full council on the 17th of March, asking council to resolve the motion set out in the papers in relation to the building of a new hospital. It was resolved that the motion should be referred to this committee with the Commission's recommendations to be reported back to Council. So can I invite Councillor Macro to explain the motion to the committee? Thank you.
Bear with me a moment, I need to go back to... I've already covered some of the things I was going to say, but basically, one of the first most important things, because this is a lifetime opportunity, we must get it right. We've had a kind of semi-half-hearted go in the past when the battle was closed, and I think we now have an opportunity to really get it right. So I've already covered the issues with the South Park. But the first time I went to the Royal Berkshire Hospital, which I think was probably in the 1970s, 1980s, basically the hospital was the old Georgian block and South block with a very long, very cold, very drafty corridor in between. It's greatly improved since then, but you've still got that kind of very long corridor there, which is not terribly attractive and useful. I've mentioned the parking issue. It's very expensive. It's expensive to park in that multi-storey. It's also very expensive to park in the surrounding streets, especially with the Reading Borough Council. It seems to be kind of putting more and more charges on and reducing the amount of on-street parking, making things life more difficult. And not everybody can walk from the Queen's Road car park. I mentioned the disadvantages of South Block, how it's so cold in the winter, so hot in the summer, and not only have you got a surgical ward, so you've got intensive care as well, and that really, really does need to be replaced. And the amount of, I believe the hospital now has a combined heat and power system. Is that true? That's good, because but you must be getting an incredible amount of heat loss from that south block. As I said, the walls are very thin. Anybody who's been to audiology, and I think you mentioned some of these buildings have now been demolished, but some of the buildings in that West Drive were extremely poor. And my wife thought they were pre-war. I don't think they're quite that old, but they are very old, very ancient, very, very awful. Reading Borough Council has come out already publicly and said they would prefer the existing site to be redeveloped. Wokingham have alternatively said that they would prefer the hospital to be on a site, if I remember correctly, it's kind of halfway between junctions 11 and 10, just south of the motorway. The existing hospital, it's extremely difficult for people to get to from West Berkshire by public transport. A hospital kind of midway between junction 11 and junction 10 would be extremely, well, it'd be impossible to get by public transport, and not very easy by private car either. So I was asking West Berkshire Council to resolve that basically their preferred option would be a new hospital on a new site that's easier for West Berkshire residents to get to, both by a private car and by public transport. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we've covered some of this already in debate, but do I have any questions? Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. You probably will understand where I'm coming from the points I raised in the questioning of the Berks officers, i.e. it all comes down to the money at the end of the day. I think I would personally love to see a redevelopment of this hospital on a new site, possibly keeping some elements within the town. We've had a discussion, I think, about splitting and having different things in different places. But fundamentally, I think that the indications I've certainly seen are that redeveloping an entirely brand new hospital somewhere else is eye-watering in the sums of money that are involved. Now, if that were possible, I would say to Councillor Macro, actually, I don't think the difficulties with public transport would exist, because I think it would be designed on the basis that there had to be public transport to any new site. And I've already mentioned Green Park Station. And so I think there would be bus services from wherever they needed to be into that site, because I think it would all be part of the design. But I do think that money comes into it. And therefore, whilst I have every sympathy with the motion, I think that we have to reflect that it has to be on the basis that the money is available to do it. We've got to be realistic. If, to take the absolute ridiculous ends of the extreme, if it cost £10 to redevelop the Royal Berks site and some million to build it elsewhere, you might say, okay, we'll spend the £10. The money really does have to come into this debate. So I would be very happy with the motion if it reflected in the final analysis that the preferred options building a new hospital, provided that that it's not going to be ridiculously expensive for the general taxpayer. After all, at the end of the day, you and I and everyone else in the room will be paying for this through our taxes, and our residents will be paying for this through their taxes. So therefore, we've got to be realistic and spend the right amount of money doing what's necessary. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I was to have seconded Councillor Macro's motion at the full council had it not been referred out. And so just sort of reflecting back on what I might have said there. And I'm to say I'm slightly disappointed that the recommendation from officers is phrased the way that it is. Two thoughts, really. I think, I mean, in my original seconding speech, I talked about this being a once in a century decision. I genuinely think that's quite likely. I don't know when the Royal Berkshire Hospital came into being on that site, but I wouldn't mind betting it was 1839. Okay, all right. So here we are, a century and a half. So maybe once in a bicentenary decision. And I think, to me, it feels that the residents of West Berkshire would want to feel that their council was kind of rooting for them in this, this significant decision for their healthcare for the next century. Now, I recognise that. There will be the scrutiny and arrangements which we talked about previously, and that we can engage in that. But I do think it worthwhile for this council to sort of match, as it were, the aspirations of Reading and Wokingham, and at least say something definitive about what it feels at this stage, notwithstanding, Councillor Bridgman's quite absolutely correct statement about, the resources will be all. I did just wonder whether the referral to the Scrutiny Committee was really the right referral, and then whether in fact actually the motion should not have gone to something a little more kind of executive, if you like, maybe the Health and Wellbeing Board, or I don't know, maybe further advice on that. But those are my sort of ramblings at the moment. I just don't feel that we can push this to one side. We should be coming out and saying something. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you. First of all, on the cost issue, yes, building a hospital on a new site will be very expensive, but I would suggest that trying to redevelop a working hospital is going to be expensive as well. And it'll be expensive in financial terms, and of course, it also cause a great deal of working difficulties. But coming on to the recommendation, I was very disappointed to see this, Madam Chairman, because as we've seen, Reading Borough Council, Wokingham Council have already made their views known. And this is kind of kicking the ball down the road, when I think this council should be able to say what our preference is. And when it comes to forming a joint scrutiny committee, that committee will certainly be attended by Reading and Wokingham, and so their views already known. And it's a bit difficult to see how they would change those in the debate in the committee. So I think we should press on, make our views known, and also form this joint scrutiny committee to take other matters further forward, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Macro. I'm going to take Councillor Linden and then Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chairman. I can't accept the officer's recommendations because of it needs to still be considered, and whether we have a new committee or not, we've got to look at the long-term interests of our residents, not just for West Berkshire, which obviously is our responsibility, but also in the rounds for the area as well, covering more than 450,000 population. But maybe we are premature on Councillor Macro's motion. It's trying to get a viability that we allow that we can't preempt and close something off at this stage. So I don't know, Chairman, if you've got any suggestions as such on the way forward, and whether we can meet somewhere to have a motion that is sympathetic to Councillor Macro, but could meet the varying changes which could be made. We don't know how much the government's going to allocate for a population of over 500,000 people, effectively.
Thanks, Councillor Linden. Let's just take some more of the debate. So, Councillor Beck. Councillor Beck, you're on mute. Thank you.
Right. One aspect that hasn't been mentioned at all, and that is that I think a lot of people will agree that to redevelop the existing site while endeavouring to keep the service available to the general public is going to be tremendously difficult and very complex, and I would suggest very expensive as opposed to the normal costs. One thing which has not been mentioned, that is that if you actually redevelop at a brand new site elsewhere, you do then have the potential value of the resale of that site for housing or whatever, which again, nobody knows what that sort of value is, none of us do. This would obviously be very considerable, and I fully understand Councillor Bridgman's concerns that money is going to be the guiding sort of hand as to what actually happens, and that is a very large factor which has to be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Macro, is that a historical hand? Legacy. Yeah, legacy. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, if I may. Firstly, I would invite anyone watching and members to go to what I've described as the mini site, which is buildingberkshiretogether.co.uk, because there the various options are laid out and different building plans are laid out, different ways of redeveloping the Craven Road site are laid out, from a relatively minimal touch beyond those that were rejected, as been mentioned previously, up to a completely redeveloped site, effectively a brand new hospital but on the existing site, and to a new hospital somewhere else. And of course, to Councillor Beck, I say that certainly the land value of the existing site will be part of the equation when one looks at all the options. I really wanted to speak to the motion. I've already made my comment about I would feel the motion would be better served if it reflected the question of money. I say that. But so far as officer's recommendation is concerned, I also have some issues with the way in which this is phrased. And the reason I say that is that, to my view, the purpose of the JHOSC, as and when, and I certainly think there needs to be one created between the three authorities, as and when it comes into being and starts to look at anything, I think it will be looking at the proposal. It won't be this range of proposals which we're looking at the moment. There will, as we know, that process is going to be gone through, and then there will be a formal proposal coming out of the trust to be consulted upon. And that, I think, is the point at which the JHOSC quite properly starts to engage in the process. I certainly do not think that it is wrong for this council to make its general views about what it would prefer known at this stage, in the same way as has already been said, Reading and Wokingham have done. I simply say that I would like to see the motion reflect the money in order to be realistic, not to say, oh, we want this, when it is completely, and when it may turn out to be unrealistic and may turn out to be pipe dream to build this brand new hospital. And I take on board everything's being said about this being a once in a generation, once in a century, once in a whatever period it might be, because it is an unbelievably important decision, and it is going to stand for a very, very, very long time, and therefore that JHOSC piece is going to be unbelievably important. But I certainly don't think council shouldn't say something about its general view at present. I just say I'd like to see the motion subtly amended to reflect reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Macro.
Oh, thank you. I think Councillor Bridgman has said a lot of what I was thinking, really. If this joint committee is going to be kind of well down the line by the time the preferred option has been decided, I think it's all the more important for us to make our preferred view known. And it is a preferred view. I mean, it's not casting anything in stone. So the issue of finance comes into it down the line it is true, but I'm not sure we need to worry that much about it at this stage. As I said, we're just saying that what is our preferred option. We're not saying what should be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, just to echo that comment, really. If I were on the JHOSC, if it were formed, it would be helpful to me, I think, to know what the preferred view of the council was at this point. So you go in there with a thought about that. And I think actually the motion, if you like, is pretty modest. It doesn't say we want a new site, in West Berkshire Council. It just says is a new site, and here are the issues that will be for our residents. So I'd like to see it go forward.
Thank you, members. Are there any more questions? Okay. Well, I do have obviously. Officer's recommendation. Can I seek a proposer and a seconder for that? My sense is that I may not get that, but I just formally putting it to the committee. Do I have a proposer for officer's recommendation? No. Okay, in which case, I'm just seeking guidance from the clerk. Do I need a proposer to reject officer's recommendation, or does this just go back to full council?
I'm not entirely sure, Chairman. I think we possibly need another motion to reject it.
To reject officer's recommendation. Do I have a proposer to reject the officer's recommendations as set out in the papers? Yes.
With the caveat that we should still go ahead with trying to form this joint scrutiny committee.
Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Yes.
Happy to second that.
Councillor Moore. And can we have a show of hands for that? Okay. I think that's carried. Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to agenda item 5. I'd like to invite Andrew to present on the overview of the trust strategy refresh and the new clinical services strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check how long we've got for this item, or these items together?
We're sort of aiming to finish around 1 o'clock, obviously with questions from members. So if we could sort of try and stick to that, I'd be grateful, but the floor is yours.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you again for inviting us to talk about this topic. And Vicky, thank you for sharing some of the slides that summarise this for those in the room and for those on joining us on a hybrid basis. So over the last 6 months, in order to support our preparation for the work we've just been talking about around the new hospital, we have been reflecting on both our trust strategy and the strategy for our clinical and operational services. And so we've kindly asked for some time to reflect on where we've got to on both of them as documents that the board has considered and is putting out for stakeholders to comment on. If we move on to the next slide, the context for this refresh is to absolutely reflect the change in conditions since we considered these two strategies back in 2017, 2018. So we've had local changes of conditions, not least the creation of the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West integrated care system, and some of the developments that we've been able to progress in Berkshire West as a collaborative at that level. We've had changes in national policy. We've been invited into the new hospital programme team, which we weren't when we originally got there. We've had the COVID pandemic And we've had an increased emphasis on aspects of social policy, such as the climate change agenda. And on top of that, we've had 5 years of delivery of clinical services to the people of Berkshire. So we thought it was the right time to take stock on our strategies and say, where have we got to and what needs to happen going forwards, and to take the learning from our teams and the views of our service users into account as we develop those services. So that was the first place. The second thing that we were keen to do through our strategy was to make sure that the approach that we took and the words that we were reflecting really reflected the views of our service users and our staff. And particularly on the latter one, we've been out running a campaign with an engagement campaign with our staff, which we call What Matters. And we've had 3,000 people engaged with that, and some of their views about what matters to them in providing services is now reflected in where we've got to on the strategy. We wanted to take a clear direction of travel towards the new hospital, as this committee's already been debating, and to consider the way in which services ought to be working at the point in which we walk into that new hospital, whatever that might look like. We know that we need to make sure that we're fit for that new hospital as we walk into it. We felt that in looking at our previous strategy, we'd set a direction, but we'd not really got focused on what that actually meant and the specifics that we wanted to hold ourselves accountable to. So our fourth priority was to make it really clear about what it was we envisaged doing in order to take ourselves forward and how we would hold ourselves to account. So that's the fourth priority. We wanted to simplify the message. Our previous strategy was too long, and we wanted to pare that back and make it clearer about what we meant. And most importantly, we wanted to recognise the huge effort of everybody who works in the hospital over the past 5 years, and put a mark in the sand to say we've achieved something, but there's still more to do. So that was on our mind as we were developing the two documents we've got in front of us. I move on to the next slide. So we have not made changes to the mission of the hospital. We felt that decision that we made in 2018 to clarify our mission as to work together to deliver outstanding care for our community absolutely resonated with where our teams and where our patients were telling us that we ought to be going. And we still feel that that's a strong message that our staff in particular understand their role and reflects the ethos that we want towards partnership working outside the hospital, but also partnership working in the hospital. And that those two things have been really effective, and we wanted to keep that. We have slightly tweaked our 5 strategic objectives. So in particular, we've tried to pull out the importance of providing highest quality of care for all. Previously, we didn't have the for all, but we've felt it was really important to make the stress towards the equalities agenda within that strategic priority, and that's been a big learning for us over the recent period. The third priority we've shifted to be delivering in partnership. Previously, that was about driving integrated care together, But we have learned over the past 5 years that actually it's a much broader partnership that we need in order to deliver the best services to our community. And we've been hugely grateful for the partnerships that we've received in the COVID pandemic period from local authorities, from our colleagues at the university, from colleagues at Reading College and beyond, in order to be able to support patients. So we've absolutely broadened that out to recognise the key partnerships that we need in order to deliver the best for our patients. And finally, we've broadened our sustainability objective to take it to include environmental sustainability as well as financial sustainability, and recognising that we are a significant contributor to the environment in our communities, and it's something that we need a sustained effort on in order to protect the environment within which we operate. So that's how we've iterated that. We've then tried to be clear about what the 3 aims and objectives are in each of our strategic priorities, and those are set out on this slide. And we're doing some work now on how we will track our progress, and identifying 10 or 11 metrics aligned to these goals that we will report on in our public reporting through board, and we'll also be able to track our progress on an operational basis as well, so that everybody's clear about how they're contributing towards driving the strategy forwards on a daily, weekly and monthly basis. If I just move on to the final slide, we've then been thinking about what does this mean, what does our overall strategy mean for how we shape our clinical services. So a few things to pull out here. Our first priority remains unchanged about delivering the highest quality of care, and we expect all of our services to make strides towards being outstanding services as defined by the CQC, but also as defined by our patients and their relatives. We aspire to nothing less than our services being outstanding every day. So that's our first priority. We've recognised that, and we wanted to strengthen the need for our services to fit around the patients as opposed to the patients fit around the services. And so our second priority is considering how we organise ourselves to provide a much more seamless experience for patients. And in particular, we expect that to be a challenge to our organising ethos. And we've been starting to explore about, colleagues will know that as they walk around the building, our buildings are named after clinical services. And we therefore organise patients by that method. Actually, in COVID, we entirely flipped the building to be organised by level of acuity. So we had patients. We had whole aspects of the building reflecting the actual clinical input that people needed. And we think there's a merit towards orientating ourselves in that direction more so than reverting back to having necessarily specialist-led areas and defined in that way. Our third objective is getting more of our services into the wellbeing space and more of the expertise that our doctors, nurses and other professionals have in supporting primary care and social services in meeting people's long-term health and wellbeing needs. And that's something that we feel really passionately about, and are challenging and supporting our teams to be spending more and more of their time out in the community and working on that agenda with their colleagues. And then finally, recognising the need, as we've been talking already in this committee, that we need to reach patients where it's best for them, and not necessarily reach patients where it's best for us. And that will mean making use of technology. It will mean making use of all of our hospital sites, and it will mean working in partnership with other places where people can receive care. So that was our fourth priority for our teams. That requires us to think differently about our workforce for tomorrow, think differently about how we use technology, and think differently about the buildings that we provide to do that in. And I think that summarises what we talk about in some rather extensive documents.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the more detailed in the report, which I thought was very helpful. I'm just going to take Chairman's privilege on the first question. You mentioned about changing your strategy to include all, for all, you mentioned. I just was interested in where it was lacking before, and you mentioned that it was sort of quite a challenge for you, or has been. If you'd elaborate on that.
I don't think so. I think that whilst our services have always been available for all, I'm not sure that we have truly understood the difference in support that we might need to provide for all to benefit from them. As Ali said, we've been exploring some of the impact that we've had around health inequalities, and trying to learn more about that. We've done some work through NHS England on a very micro scale about our outpatient appointments, and we know that we have, I think it's the did not attend rate for outpatient appointments is double if you are in the lowest two socio-economic groups than it is for the highest. And we've been out talking to patients in focus groups, trying to understand why that might be. And it appears very simple, but not something that we really bake into our thought process and operational process. So people from those groups have a higher rate of household instability. So if you're trying to write to them at the same address, they're not there. They're much more likely to not have the same mobile phone number from quarter to quarter. So if you're trying to text them, they may not be there. Equally, they may have employment circumstances that makes a 9-to-5 based appointment much more difficult for them. Yet we still offer appointments between 9 and 5. So there are all things that we think we're going to have to think quite differently about in order to support the outcomes that that the NHS promises for. We might actually have to do things differently, and we wanted to really strengthen that that understanding in our strategy to make it explicit that we might have to do something different to better support people.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I found the document very, very refreshing, to be honest with you. But I've got some questions. One on page, well, I've got 3 on page 20 and a load for page 35. So if we start with page 20 of the agenda, if I may.
Of the report.
Of the report, yes. So of your report page, yeah. So it's the 3 questions I've got on that page 20 was, should there be also something about improving staff satisfaction and well-being. Care needs to be taken when using digital channels, not to exclude those who are not digitally enabled, stroke confident, or they don't use it at all. And thirdly, how easy would it be for the trust to live within their means and still provide the highest quality care for all?
Should we take those first?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So improving satisfaction, were you suggesting that you thought we needed an explicit metric on improving satisfaction? Was that the question?
I
give it.
No, it was just a general point really rather than metric.
Yeah.
Andy.
Okay. So I think that we do regularly track staff satisfaction. We thought that the retention data was the best and most consistent way of looking at that. But obviously, staff engagement is a key indicator to whether they're going to stay with you. But what we need is the people to deliver, the right people with the right skills to deliver the services. So we wanted to make sure that we encaptured all of that, but making sure we're focusing on staff satisfaction is something we do regularly, and it doesn't go away as part of the strategy.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Linden, could you just lower your paper because we can't actually see you on the screen? Thank you. Sorry. Do you want to continue with the second part of your question?
Yeah, I think the second part was about digital exclusion. Absolutely. We're very conscious that we can't take it for granted that people can use digital technology. And when we think about digital, it's absolutely as an additional channel for patients, and being able to make it available for patients who do want to use digital and who do find that a way of better engaging with us and receiving the services that they need. Finance, as with all public services, so it's a challenge to live within your financial means at all times. But as taxpayers, that's what we need to be mindful of, that we're using money well and wisely, and that will often, as we've discussed already, act as a potential limiter on our ambitions.
So, and you're still striving to produce the highest quality care for all, despite the financial challenges.
We the assessment that our regulators give us, and we give ourselves, absolutely, is that part of our quality is whether we're living within our means. So I think the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And then on page 35, there's 7 questions to doing so. So I'll start. What is the
current? Councillor Linden, is it worth just sort of phrasing some of these which cover the same topic? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So if I just do the question, I mean, what is the current level of staff vacancies to start with, on a general basis rather than a micro basis?
So staff vacancy numbers went down during the pandemic. I think we were running at 14-15% pre-pandemic. They'd gone down to I think 12%. I may have to pick this up and get you the precise numbers. We know that we've experienced, though, some increase in turnover as people have made decisions post-pandemic about where they work. That's that's our current position on.
And that would include auxiliaries as well, wouldn't it? Like cleaners and people.
Absolutely, and the staff vacancies differ significantly across different staff groups.
Okay, and has staffing numbers been affected by Brexit?
I don't have the intelligence to say yes or no to that question.
Okay, what is the recruitment strategy, and how does that affect retention and obviously retirements in terms of age ranges?
So we are always actively recruiting on a against the vacancies that we have. We've got a really big recruitment team, and we work with colleagues at national and local level to fill some of those vacancies when as and when they arise.
So in terms of retention, would you say that is a problem because you can recruit well, but if you carry on losing people, it can make the situation worse?
So it is our ambition to have slightly lower retention, slightly lower turnover rates than we currently have. We're not complacent about our position on staffing retention or vacancies, but we're hugely proud of the work that we've done on cultural engagement and our wider employee benefit package that stood us in really good stead through COVID. And so our staff survey results are being published. They're out in our public board pack for this month. We're really pleased that we remain one of the top performing acute trusts against our peers on staff engagement and satisfaction, and that's holding us in good stead at the moment.
Is there a structural problem in terms of retirements, that you have a load of people who are due for retirement and your replacements in terms of people coming in and experience? Is that a particular problem at all?
I don't believe we're exposed any more than other public services are to that particular challenge of the ageing workforce at the moment.
Thank you. Does that answer all your questions, Councillor?
Just a couple more on that, if I may ask.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific areas where you've got the most critical staff shortages in a generalisation base?
I think I'd have to pick that up with our Chief People Officer and bring that back
okay.
to you.
And the current ethnic mix within the workforce, are there plans to improve diversity at board level?
Yeah, so diversity and inclusion is a really big agenda for Don, our Chief People Officer, and for the whole board. We've got several initiatives, not least staff forums, in order to support that agenda. And we're particularly focusing our efforts on how we are supporting people to supporting the staff that we have to take advantages of career development, because we recognise that within our data there are particular step points where where we go from quite representative levels of staff from different ethnic minority backgrounds to overwhelmingly white leaders and managers. And so we're really keen to look at what we can do around that transition point to better support people taking advantage of those career opportunities.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On the issue of, you say you would want to reach patients where it's best, I was wondering whether there are any plans to kind of enhance the minor injuries unit at the West Berkshire Hospital. And the other thing is, there was a walk-in centre in Reading which I think closed during COVID, may have opened again, which I presume is provided by the CCG. But you mentioned partnerships, and I was wondering whether that's something you could roll out to more communities and perhaps relieve the pressure on the A&E.
Very live topic, because I spent my weekend on call. The minor injuries unit at West Berks is run by our colleagues at Berkshire Healthcare. And along with the walk-in centre and other proposals, I know that the Berkshire West Urgent Care Board is really is prioritising its work about what we do to support people who are who have minor ailment or minor injury and are seeking care at the moment. I think ourselves and primary care are all experiencing an increase in demand from the public for that. And I think we need to think quite differently about how we're supporting people to access the care that they are coming forward with at the moment, because the level of demand is outstripping capacity. I think we need to think about that. Think about what we can do in all forms of support, both from increasing individuals' self-confidence in self-care, all the way through to what we do around ED and minor injuries units as well.
You mentioned the minor injuries unit is provided by another, as a Berkshire Healthcare Trust. I've always got a bit confused at the hospital because there's different bits run by different trusts. But you mentioned partnership working, so perhaps it would be a good idea to try and do a little bit of partnership working with them to try and enhance that kind of facility.
Yeah, absolutely. The work that we do together through the urgent emergency care group is the place for that, and it's a partnership piece of work that we do. The specific service at West Berks will, we hope, will be enhanced by the work we're doing about diagnostics out at West Berks Community Centre at the moment. So we've been gifted some money by the Greenham charity to support expansion of some of our diagnostic services there. We also had some funding from NHS England to support additional staffing capacity of the existing services on that site around X-ray, and that should provide some benefit to the capability that we're of, the level of service that we're able to operate from West Berks on the injuries perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, you mean the Greenham Common Trust when you mentioned the
Yes.
Greenham charity?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I just reflecting, you made a comment about sort of, it's a strategy looking forward. We've talked earlier on about 100-year views and such like. How do you, and technology is obviously, it's played a huge part in health service provision, I guess, from day one, really. But how do you look forward to where technology might be, in, well, I mean, even 10, 20 years time? I guess it's changing so quickly. What sort of processes do you go for there? How can you envisage where we might be and how that influences how you deliver?
Yes, my colleagues at the Berkshire Medical Museum will definitely support your view about technology being important from day one. So yes, absolutely. So how do we go about looking at the options, the potential of technology? I presume the council is very similar in employing people from the sector for whom this is a priority, and they have expertise in. We also regularly partake in forums from other hospitals, both in the UK and beyond, about where could technology take us. And then we've recently taken a paper through our board about our future technological advancements on the digital enablement side, and identified opportunities for us and for our patients from that, around enhancing existing services, but also where we would seek to extend that, and in particular how we make use of technology to allow patients to do better self-serve through the portals that exist.
Thank you. Councillor Moore. Is that a legacy hand? Do I have any other questions? Any other questions from members? Any other comments? No? Thank you very much for that. So there's no recommendation associated with this report. Members are simply asked to note the report and to consider if there's any further scrutiny work of matters raised in the report to include in the committee's future work programme. So that concludes the business of today. I would just very much like to thank our guests today, so Andrew, Alison and Tom, for their contribution, for such thorough reporting, and also for answering all these questions today. So thank you very, very much, and thank you members, and thank you officers as well. I'd like to ask all panellists to remain in the virtual meeting room and not leave until the Zoom host confirm the meeting is no longer live streamed. Thank you.